Title: HOA demanded I move my boat for ripples. I turned the tables and fined them for trespass. HOA demanded I move my boat for ripples, but what they didn't know was that I owned the lake. The president of the HOA showed up at my door, smirking, saying I was disturbing the peace. She told me to move my boat for ripples. But I just stood there, grinning, because what she didn't realize was that I had a card up my sleeve, and it was about to turn the tables. I didn't move the boat. I moved the whole game in a way she never saw coming. Welcome to the HOA unit, where we dive into the drama, suspense, and twisted power struggles of suburban life. I'm Adam, a regular guy living in a quiet little neighborhood just like yours. But trust me, things get a whole lot crazier when the HOA starts pushing buttons they shouldn't. Grab your popcorn. This story's about to get wild. I stood there, frozen, watching the HOA president. Her smile wide, but her eyes cold. "You need to move your boat. It's causing ripples," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. I stared at her, feeling a rush of disbelief and anger. Ripples? Seriously? I looked over at my boat, floating peacefully on the water, the ripples barely noticeable against the calm surface of the lake. It was the kind of lake that people like me would give anything to own. The kind of lake that had been in my family for generations. She was still standing there, waiting for me to respond, her arms crossed like she was making some kind of big demand. I could feel the tension in the air. It was thick, like something was about to snap. "What do you mean, ripples?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my mind was racing. "It's just a boat. It's not causing anything." She shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "We've had complaints. You're disturbing the peace around here, and we have rules. You can't just keep your boat here if it's causing problems." Her words were like a punch to the gut. I had always known the HOA was a little too controlling, but this? It was something else. They had never gotten involved with anything like this before. Sure, they'd sent a few notes about lawn care and mailbox heights. But a boat? On my lake? I stood there staring at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. But the more she talked, the more I realized something. This wasn't about ripples. It never was. The HOA president, with her perfectly manicured nails and her self-righteous attitude, had always thought she could control everything. The lawn lengths, the paint colors, the driveway placements. And now, apparently, my boat. It was like she thought she could dictate every part of our lives, down to the smallest detail. But this was my lake. I'd inherited it from my grandparents. It was in my name, and there was no rule saying I couldn't keep a boat on it, but she didn't know that. "Look," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm not moving my boat. It's not causing any real problems, and it's my property. I have every right to keep it here." Her smile faded, but she didn't back down. "We're giving you one chance to move it, or we'll fine you. If the ripples continue, we'll have no choice but to take further action." A fine? For ripples? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was absurd. But what really bothered me was the way she said it, like she was in complete control of the situation. Like she had the power to dictate every little thing I did. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to move the boat. In fact, I was going to do something even better. I wasn't just going to sit there and let her walk all over me. I was going to fight back. And I wasn't going to use any of the usual methods. No arguments. No loud confrontations. I was going to fight back in a way she wouldn't see coming. I turned and walked back to my house, feeling a spark of defiance grow inside me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. The HOA president wasn't just trying to control my boat. She was trying to control everything. The way I lived. The way I enjoyed my property. And I wasn't going to let her. When I got inside, I sat down at my desk and started looking through the HOA rules. I had seen them 1,000 times before, but this time, I was looking for something different, something that would give me the upper hand, and that's when I found it. The lake. The lake wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. It was mine. It had always been mine. I couldn't help but smile as I read the fine print. The HOA had no right to tell me what to do with it, no right to fine me for a boat that wasn't causing any harm. But what really made my heart race was the thought of what I could do next. I didn't just have the upper hand. I had the whole deck of cards. I started writing the letter to the HOA. The letter that would turn everything around. I wasn't just going to ignore their demands. I was going to take action. I was going to find them. I thought back to the way she had looked at me, all high and mighty, thinking she could control everything. I imagined her face when she read my letter, when she realized that I wasn't the one who had to follow her rules. She was the one who had been trespassing. I sealed the letter, feeling a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about the boat anymore. It was about standing up to the person who thought she could control me and showing her that I wasn't going to be pushed around. The next day, I sent the letter. I knew it would be a while before anything happened, but I couldn't wait to see how they would react. I had a feeling the tables were about to turn, and I was ready for whatever came next. The letter was sent, and now all I could do was wait. For the first time in a long time, I felt a little bit of peace. It was a strange feeling, like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew I was in the right, and for once I wasn't just going to let the HOA run my life. The days passed by slowly. The usual routine of work, errands, and random neighborhood gossip filled the hours. But something felt different this time. The tension in the air was palpable. Even the neighbors seemed to notice, although none of them dared to ask me about the boat. It was as if they all sensed something was about to go down. Then, a week later, it came. The letter from the HOA. I opened it cautiously, half expecting a standard threat, another fine, maybe even a warning to remove the boat. But as I read through the formal language, it was clear. They had underestimated me. There was no apology, no recognition of the mistake they had made. Instead, they demanded I appear at the next HOA meeting to discuss the ripples issue. It felt like a slap in the face. They were trying to act like I had caused a real problem when all I was doing was living my life, enjoying my property. But this was good. I knew I was pushing their buttons, and that's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to let them win this time. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about my boat. It was about something much bigger. The HOA had gotten so used to controlling every little thing in the neighborhood that they thought they could push everyone around without consequences. But I wasn't going to let them control me. Not anymore. I started preparing for the meeting. I couldn't show up unprepared. I wasn't going to just sit there and listen to them lecture me about ripples and disturbing the peace. No, I was going to turn this around. I was going to fight back, but this time I needed to be smart. I wasn't just going to use my boat as a reason for the fight. I had something much bigger in mind. I spent the next few days researching the HOA's powers and limitations. I pulled out every document, every piece of paper I could find that mentioned the rules of the neighborhood, and the more I dug, the more I realized something else. The HOA had overstepped their boundaries on multiple occasions in the past. I found proof, tons of it. It wasn't just about the boat anymore. It was about a system that had gotten too comfortable in its power, a group of people who thought they could bully anyone who dared to step out of line. The night before the meeting, I could hardly sleep. I kept running through everything in my head, making sure I had all my facts straight. I knew I was about to walk into a battle, but I wasn't going to back down. The meeting was at the community center, the same place where all the neighborhood events were held. I walked in a little early, just to get a feel for the room. The long tables were already set up with a few people milling around. chatting quietly. And there she was, the HOA president. She was sitting at the head of the table as if she owned the entire room. She glanced at me as I walked in, her eyes narrowing for just a moment before she went back to talking to the board members. I took a seat near the back, watching them all closely. The other board members were just as smug as she was, acting like they controlled everything in the neighborhood. But what they didn't know was that I had the upper hand now. The meeting started, and as expected, the president began by addressing the boat issue. She went on and on about how the ripples were disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Peaceful? The only thing peaceful about this place was the quiet before the storm. I waited for my turn to speak, my hands clenched into fists under the table. When the time came, I stood up slowly, feeling all eyes on me. "I'd like to address the issue," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "But I have a few things to say before we continue with the ripples discussion." The room went silent. "I've done my research," I continued, "and I think you'll find that the HOA has been overstepping its bounds for some time now." I watched as the president's face changed. The smug expression faltered for a split second. I had her attention now. "I've gone through the HOA rules, and I found several areas where the board has been abusing its power. You've been fining people for minor violations that don't even fall under your jurisdiction. You've even trespassed on private property. My property, in fact." The room shifted. People began whispering to each other, and I could see the board members trying to hide their discomfort. But I wasn't done. "I've been given the legal right to do what I want on my own property," I said, my voice rising. "And I'm done being bullied by this HOA, so I'm issuing a fine for trespassing for every person here who's tried to control what I do on my land without cause." The president's face turned red. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her speak. "I'll see you in court," I said, smiling to myself. I could see it in her eyes, the panic, the realization that she had underestimated me. I sat back down, my heart pounding, but I felt a sense of victory wash over me. The next few days felt like the calm before a storm, but I could feel the tension building, like the air was thick with electricity, just waiting for something to happen. I had issued the fine for trespassing. It wasn't a small move, it was bold, almost reckless. But I didn't care. It was the first time in a long while that I had stood up for myself, and it felt freeing. The HOA president had underestimated me. She had no idea what she was up against. But I wasn't fooling myself. I knew what was coming next. This was just the beginning. The day after the meeting, I got a call from my lawyer. He sounded a little uneasy when he spoke. "They're going to fight this. I'm hearing rumors they're planning to take legal action against you." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers on the desk. I had expected this. I knew they wouldn't just roll over. But I also knew that I had the law on my side. The problem wasn't whether I was in the right. It was whether I could outsmart them before they had a chance to turn the tables. The HOA was powerful, but I had something they didn't, a sense of justice and a refusal to back down. I had dealt with petty people before, and this was just another battle in a long line of them. I wasn't about to let them bully me into submission. A few hours later, another letter arrived. This one was even more official-looking than the last. It had the HOA's emblem stamped on it, the type of letter that made your stomach drop when you saw it in your mailbox. I tore it open with a mix of excitement and dread. It was a summons. They wanted to take me to court over the fine I had issued for trespassing. This was no longer just a petty neighborhood dispute. It was turning into something bigger. My mind raced. I couldn't believe this was happening. A court battle over a boat. A court battle over ripples on a lake. But I wasn't scared. In fact, I felt more determined than ever. I couldn't just back down now. The stakes were too high. This wasn't just about the boat anymore. It was about standing up for myself. Standing up to a system that had controlled everything in my neighborhood for too long. I called my lawyer Bees, back determined to get ahead of them. I wasn't going to let the HOA control the narrative. Not this time. "We need to get ahead of this," I said to him, my voice firm. "I'm not backing down, and I don't care if it goes to court. I'm ready." The lawyer agreed, but there was a sense of unease in his voice. I could tell he was nervous about what was coming next. But I wasn't. I knew I had the truth on my side, and that was more powerful than any legal loophole the HOA could throw at me. The next few days passed in a blur of legal paperwork, phone calls, and strategy sessions. But even as I worked tirelessly to prepare for the legal battle, the neighbors started talking. Word spread fast. People had started to take notice of what I was doing. Some were supportive, some were worried, but the whispers were getting louder. The HOA was becoming a joke, and I was becoming the underdog hero who had decided to take a stand. It felt strange. This wasn't supposed to be my fight, but here I was fighting for what was right. And I could feel the momentum building. I wasn't just fighting the HOA anymore. I was fighting for the whole neighborhood, for everyone who had ever been bullied or intimidated into silence. A week later, the day of the hearing arrived. My lawyer and I walked into the courthouse, and I could feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a battle over a boat anymore. It was a battle for control of our lives, a battle for the soul of the neighborhood. The room was tense as the HOA president walked in, her usual smug expression replaced by a cold, calculating look. She had brought her team of lawyers with her, and they were all well-dressed, well-prepared, and well-funded. I could see the fear in her eyes now. The calm, confident demeanor from the meeting was gone. She knew this wasn't going to be as easy as she had thought. I stood tall, feeling a rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was my moment. The hearing started, and the judge called us both to the stand. The president went first, spouting off her usual arguments about the ripples and the disruption my boat was causing. It was all nonsense, of course, but she was good at playing the victim, painting herself as the concerned neighbor just trying to keep the peace. Then it was my turn. I stood up, my heart pounding, and walked to the front of the room. I looked at the judge, then at the HOA president, and then at the room full of people who had shown up to watch. "I'm not here to make trouble," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here because the HOA has been bullying people in this neighborhood for far too long. I'm here because this is my property, and I won't let anyone take that away from me." The room went silent. Even the HOA president seemed taken aback by my words. "I've done my research, and I found that the HOA has been overstepping its bounds for years. They have no right to control what happens on my property. They've even trespassed on it, and I'm here to put an end to that." The judge nodded, taking in everything I said. I could see the wheels turning in his head. The truth was starting to sink in. Then, just as I thought things were starting to go in my favor, the HOA president made a move. She stood up, her eyes narrowing. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you can just take us down like this? Do you really think you have a chance?" Her words were meant to provoke me, to make me doubt myself. But they had the opposite effect. "Watch me," I said, my voice unwavering. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about standing up for everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever been told they didn't matter. I wasn't just fighting for, my boat anymore. I was fighting for justice. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, but I couldn't back down now. Not after everything that had led to this moment. As I stood there facing the judge, the HOA president, and her smug team of lawyers, I felt like I was in the middle of a storm. The storm wasn't just about the boat or the ripples anymore. It was about power. It was about control. And it was about me taking a stand. You can't just ignore the rules, the HOA president sneered from her seat. We're just trying to maintain peace in the neighborhood. Her words were a familiar, predictable script. She was doing everything she could to make me look like the villain. She wanted the judge to think I was some troublemaker, a rebel who didn't care about the community. But I knew that wasn't true. I cared about the people in this neighborhood, most of them anyway. I just didn't care for the HOA's constant meddling. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and stood tall. The HOA president has been calling the shots in this neighborhood for too long, I said, making sure every word landed. She's been sending fines for ridiculous things like lawn height, mailbox color, and now my boat, which is on my property. This is a personal attack, not a concern for the community, and I'm not backing down. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. The judge looked down at his papers, scribbling something quickly. His silence was heavy, but I knew he was listening. The HOA president's smug expression faltered for a brief moment. I'd gotten under her skin. She's using the HOA rules like a weapon, I continued. And the truth is, those rules don't even apply to my property. The lake is mine. It's been in my family for generations. This isn't about ripples. It's about control. She wants to make an example of me, but I'm not playing by her rules anymore. I could see the other board members squirming in their seats. They weren't used to being called out like this. They were used to controlling the narrative, but the tables had turned. They were the ones on the defensive now, and I wasn't going to stop until I had exposed them for who they really were. The judge finally spoke. "Mr. Your name. I understand your position," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But the HOA does have certain powers in the neighborhood. Can you show me proof that they've overstepped their bounds?" My heart raced. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I pulled out a thick folder from my briefcase, filled with documents, pictures, and evidence. The silence in the room deepened as I laid it all out before the judge. This is the documentation showing how the HOA has overreached in multiple instances, I said, flipping through the pages. These fines are arbitrary and go beyond the boundaries set by the HOA's own rules. The lake is not under their control. They've been trespassing on my property and issuing fines for things that don't even violate their own rules. I could see the HOA president's face go white. Her lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing that I wasn't just another homeowner they could intimidate. The judge examined the evidence carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I see," he said slowly. "This is a serious matter. I will need to review the documents further, but based on what I've seen, it looks like you have a strong case." My heart skipped a beat. This was going better than I expected, but there was still a long road ahead. The judge wasn't making any decisions yet. He just acknowledged the strength of my evidence. The HOA president, looking like a cornered animal, stood up and tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, this isn't about control. This is about keeping the peace. This is about maintaining the integrity of the community," she said, her voice shaking with barely contained frustration. But the damage had already been done. Her words felt empty now. She had no answers, no defenses. She was cornered, and it was obvious to everyone in the room. I felt a sense of triumph, but I couldn't let my guard down. This wasn't over. The judge's ruling wasn't final yet, and I knew the HOA would do whatever it took to win. After a tense pause, the judge stood up and addressed both sides. "I'll need some time to review the evidence before making a ruling," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "We will reconvene in 1 week." With that, the hearing was adjourned. The courtroom buzzed with the noise of chairs scraping against the floor as everyone filed out. But as I walked past the HOA president, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had underestimated me. And now she was facing the consequences. Over the next week, the tension only grew. I couldn't stop thinking about the court case. Every time I passed the lake, I looked at my boat and felt a rush of defiance. I wasn't going to let the HOA win. They had crossed a line, and I was ready to make them pay for it. The neighbors were starting to notice too. Word had spread that the HOA had tried to push me around, and the support I received from them was overwhelming. Many of them had dealt with the HOA's petty fines and ridiculous rules, but they'd never dared to stand up like I had. They were watching me, waiting to see what would happen next. And then, just as I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I had won, something unexpected happened. The HOA president showed up at my house again. She was standing at my door when I opened it, a look of desperation in her eyes. But instead of a threat, she came with an offer. "I think we can work something out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's settle this, Beffy, or it gets out of hand." I raised an eyebrow, confused. "Settle this? After everything you've put me through?" She nodded. "You have to understand, this is about more than just the boat. It's about control. If you drop the fine and agree to certain conditions, we can avoid all this. We can make it go away." The nerve of her. The HOA president was standing on my doorstep, looking like she had just swallowed a lemon. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let that sway me. After everything that had happened, I wasn't going to let her get off easy. "I think we can work something out," she repeated, her voice softer than usual, almost pleading. "Let's settle this before it gets out of hand." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. It was like she had just flipped the script. One minute she was trying to find me for something as ridiculous as ripples, and now she was standing in front of me offering a deal. It didn't make sense. "Settle this?" I asked, crossing my arms. "After everything you've done, the fines, the trespassing, and now you want to settle?" She shifted on her feet, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm just trying to avoid a bigger mess. This could escalate, and no one wants that. The HOA doesn't want to be the bad guy, and you don't want this to drag out either." I almost laughed. She was right about one thing. It could escalate, but it was too late for that. "What's the deal?" I asked, keeping my tone cool. I wasn't about to make it easy for her. She had been a thorn in my side for far too long, and now she was trying to get out of it. I wasn't just going to forgive and forget. She took a deep breath, then spoke quickly, like she was afraid I might interrupt her. "If you drop the fine and agree to a few conditions, we'll call it even. The boat can stay, and we'll make sure no further action is taken. The neighborhood will get back to normal. No more issues, no more trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want in return?" Her expression was hard to read. She was clearly calculating every word she said. "We just need you to agree to some adjustments, small things, like keeping the boat a little more tucked away, making sure it doesn't create any more ripples, that's all. If you agree to that, everything will go back to normal." I felt a rush of anger mixed with disbelief. Was she seriously asking me to back down and just accept her terms? The nerve. "You're asking me to make more concessions? To let you control my property even more than you already have?" I said, shaking my head. "No, that's not going to happen." She hesitated, but then she doubled down. "We just want peace. It's not personal, you know. This is just how things need to be done for the sake of the neighborhood." For the sake of the neighborhood. The words were so hollow. The HOA had never cared about the neighborhood. They cared about power, control, and now they were trying to use me to make themselves look like the good guys. I wasn't about to fall for that. "You're not going to bully me into submission anymore," I said firmly. You've had your chance. This is my property. I'm not going to live by your rules any longer. So, if you're here to try and make a deal, you're wasting your time." Her face flushed a deep red, her mask of professionalism cracking. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't just about the boat. It's about keeping the peace. You're making a big mistake." "I don't care about your peace," I said, cutting her off. "You've disrupted my life for long enough. I'm not going to let you control me anymore." I turned away from the door, ready to end the conversation. But then, just as I was about to shut it, I heard her voice one last time. "Think about it," she said, almost in a whisper. "You don't want this to get worse. The HOA has a lot of power. More than you realize." That was the last thing she said before she turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my mind racing. Was this the end of it? Was I really going to let her off the hook just because she offered me a deal? No, I wasn't going to back down. Not after everything that had happened. But her last words stuck with me. The HOA has a lot of power. More than you realize. What did she mean by that? Was there something bigger at play here? Something I hadn't considered? I knew I couldn't let my guard down. Not now. Not when I was so close to winning. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept thinking about the offer she had made. It was tempting. Maybe a part of me wanted to just end the whole thing. But deep down, I knew I couldn't back down. If I gave in now, I would be letting her win. I would be letting the HOA keep controlling the neighborhood, and I couldn't allow that. I called my lawyer and told him about the latest developments. He was just as skeptical as I was. "Don't take the bait," he warned me. "They're trying to make you think they've got more power than they really do. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Stick to your guns. You've got the law on your side." It was good advice. I knew he was right. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the boat anymore. This was about something bigger. It was about taking down the HOA for good. It was about showing them that they couldn't keep bullying people around. That night, as I sat in my living room, staring out at the lake, I realized something. This wasn't just about the boat or the ripples. It was about standing up to a system that thought it could control everything. A system that thought it could silence anyone who dared to question its authority. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Next day, I sent a letter to the HOA president. It wasn't the kind of letter she had been hoping for. I wasn't going to settle. Not now. Not ever. It felt like the calm before a storm. I had just sent that letter to the HOA president. I knew it would shake things up, but I had no idea just how much. I went to bed that night with a strange sense of determination, but also an underlying tension. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The storm was just beginning to gather. The next morning, I woke up to a call from my lawyer. His voice was more serious than usual. "We've got a problem," he said. Before I could even say hello, I sat up in bed, instantly on alert. "What's happened?" "The HOA is pushing back harder than I expected. They're not going to just drop this." I leaned forward, listening intently as he explained. The HOA had found a loophole they were trying to exploit. They claimed that even though the lake was mine, I had violated a zoning ordinance related to water access. They were pulling out all the stops to make it look like I was in the wrong. My stomach sank. This wasn't just some petty neighborhood dispute anymore. This was turning into a full-blown legal fight. "They're going to file an injunction," my lawyer continued. "They're trying to block you from using your own property while this case is still ongoing." I couldn't believe it. The HOA wasn't backing down. They were going all in. "They're playing dirty," I muttered, pacing around the room. "What's our next move?" "I'm gathering the evidence," my lawyer said. "We need to make sure we hit back hard. But I'll warn you, this could take a while. It's going to get ugly." A heavy silence fell over the conversation. I knew he was right. The HOA had power, but I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't going to let them scare me into giving up. Later that day, the HOA sent another letter. This one was more aggressive than the last. They weren't just asking for compliance anymore. They were demanding it. The letter read, "You have violated HOA rules regarding lake access. Failure to comply with these demands will result in further legal action, including fines and potential eviction from the neighborhood." Eviction. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I read the letter over and over, trying to make sense of it. Eviction? For what? For using my own boat on my own property? They were trying to intimidate me. But I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them control my life. I called my lawyer again, my mind racing. "We need to hit them where it hurts," I said, barely able to contain my frustration. "They're trying to take away everything. I won't let them." "We'll get through this," my lawyer reassured me. "But we need to stay calm and stick to the facts. The more you retaliate emotionally, the more they'll use it against you." I sighed, trying to steady myself. "I'll stay calm, but I'm done letting them walk all over me." For the next few days, I threw myself into the legal preparations. My lawyer and I went over every detail, every tiny nuance in the HOA's rules, trying to find the loopholes in their case. We worked late into the night, preparing a defense so airtight that the HOA wouldn't be able to touch it. As the days wore on, I could feel the pressure building. It was as if the whole neighborhood was watching, waiting for something to happen. And sure enough, the day of the next court hearing arrived. This time, it was different. The stakes had been raised. The HOA had clearly thought they could intimidate me into submission, but they had underestimated me again. When I walked into the courtroom, I could feel the weight of the situation. The tension was thick. The HOA president was there. She, of course, sitting smugly with her team of lawyers. But today, it wasn't just about the boat. It was about everything they had tried to take from me. It was about standing up to a system that had taken advantage of so many people for so long. As the judge called the hearing to order, I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. The courtroom was packed. This wasn't just a battle over a boat anymore. It was about something much bigger. The HOA president went first, of course, trying to paint herself as the victim. She claimed that my boat was causing irreparable damage to the neighborhood. She listed a series of complaints that seemed to come straight from the HOA playbook. But this time, it didn't faze me. I was ready. When it was my turn, I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. I wasn't going to back down. "I'm here today because I've had enough," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "I've had enough of being bullied by the HOA. This isn't just about the boat. This is about the way the HOA has treated people in this neighborhood for years. This is about taking back control. This is about standing up for what's right." The room went silent. I could see the judge nodding, taking in every word. The HOA president's face twisted with frustration, but she didn't interrupt me. She knew she was losing her grip. "I'm not asking for special treatment," I continued. "I'm asking for fairness. I'm asking for the right to live on my own property without being controlled by people who think they can dictate every aspect of my life. The HOA doesn't own my lake. They don't own my property. And I'm done letting them act like they do." There was a pause in the courtroom, and then I saw it. The shift. The judge was no longer looking at me like I was the problem. His gaze had softened, and he was listening to what I had to say. The HOA president stood up, and her voice shaking. "This is about the community. The rules exist for a reason." I smiled to myself. The more she spoke, the more desperate she sounded, and the more the judge seemed to see it. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been pushed around by the HOA, and I wasn't going to let them win. The courtroom felt like a battlefield. The air was thick with tension, and every word spoken seemed to echo in the silent space. I had fought long and hard to get to this moment, and now it was finally time to finish what I'd started. The judge's eyes were locked on me, his gaze steady and contemplative. I could feel the weight of his attention, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready, more than ready. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, researching every corner of the HOA's rules, and making sure I had every argument laid out perfectly. And now, it was all coming to a head. The HOA president was sitting across the room, her face red with frustration. She had tried everything: legal threats, manipulation, even trying to make a deal with me. But nothing had worked. I wasn't backing down, and I could see it in her eyes. She knew it was over. The judge spoke first, his voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Your name. I've reviewed the evidence carefully. The HOA claims that your boat is causing disturbances to the neighborhood. However, as I've seen in the documentation, there is no clear violation of the rules that would justify such actions. The lake is your property, and the HOA's jurisdiction does not extend to it." A wave of relief washed over me, but I forced myself to stay focused. This wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of the HOA's abuse of power, and I wasn't about to let them off the hook for that. The judge continued, "Furthermore, I've noted the numerous complaints of the HOA's overreach in the neighborhood, and I've reviewed the documentation regarding the fines that were issued without proper cause. The actions are unacceptable, and I cannot allow them to continue." The HOA president's face twisted with anger, but I could see the cracks starting to show. She was losing. She had thought that her power was absolute, that no one could challenge her. But now, in front of the judge, she was realizing that she had been wrong. "You cannot continue to operate in this manner," the judge said, turning his attention to her. "The HOA's actions have caused unnecessary tension in the community, and I am issuing an order to stop any further harassment or illegal fines. The homeowners have a right to live in peace without being intimidated." I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. It was happening. The tables had completely turned. But then the judge dropped the bombshell. "And as for the fine you issued to Mr. Your Name for trespassing, I am overturning that fine. In fact, I am ordering the HOA to pay a fine for its unlawful actions." The room went silent. The judge's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The HOA president's face drained of color. She had never expected this. It was over. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, but at the same time, I couldn't quite believe it. I had won. The HOA had been exposed for what they truly were: a bully hiding behind rules and authority to control people. The judge turned to me and gave a small nod. "Mr. Your Name, I'm ruling in your favor. The HOA must cease all actions against you, and they are to issue a formal apology for the harassment and trespassing fines. Your boat is yours to keep." I stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. I had won, not just for me, but for everyone in the neighborhood who had suffered under the HOA's control. This wasn't just about one boat. This was about taking back the power. The judge wrapped up the proceedings, and the room slowly began to clear out. I walked out of the courtroom, my heart still racing, but with a smile on my face. The fight had been long and hard, but I had stood my ground, and now the HOA had to answer for their actions. Outside, the sun was shining, and the air felt a little fresher. I looked around at the neighborhood, at the homes that had been controlled for so long, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been silenced by the HOA. I had fought for something bigger than myself, and now I could see the change happening. Over the next few weeks, word of my victory spread through the neighborhood. The HOA, once a powerful force in our community, was now being scrutinized by every homeowner. They couldn't intimidate people the way they used to. People started standing up for themselves, taking back their own power. I became a kind of hero in the neighborhood. Not because I was looking for glory, but because I had taken a stand when no one else would. I wasn't just some guy with a boat. I was someone who had decided to say enough is enough. As for the HOA president, she resigned shortly after the ruling. The pressure had become too much. She had tried to control everyone, but in the end it was her own power that had destroyed her.